Japanese composer Ryuichi Sakamoto helped change the possibilities of electronic music with Yellow Magic Orchestra, but that was only the beginning. From experimental electronics to unexpected collaborations and a film role that accidentally opened an entirely new career, Sakamoto seemed determined never to stay in one musical world for long. So how did it all begin? By the late 70s, Ryuichi Sakamoto was already an unusually accomplished young musician. Formerly trained in composition at Tokyo University of the Arts, he had begun earning a living as a session musician, arranger and producer. It was through those recording sessions that he came to know two musicians he already respected, Haruomi Hosono and Yukihiro Takahashi. Hosono was developing an idea for a new group and invited Sakamoto and Takahashi to play on one of his recording sessions. Only afterwards did Sakamoto discover that the session had also been something of an audition. Soon afterwards, Hosono invited the two musicians to his home and revealed his plans for what would become Yellow Magic Orchestra. His presentation was unconventional. He showed them a drawing of Mount Fuji erupting, accompanied by the words 5 million sails. Hosono's ambition was to create something distinctive in Japan that could reach an international audience. Sakamoto wasn't immediately convinced. He was already busy with session work and later admitted, laughing at his younger self, that he didn't particularly want to sacrifice his precious free time to join a band. He even described his attitude at the time as arrogant. But Hosono's idea of creating music in Japan and taking it out into the world intrigued him enough to say yes. In 1978, Sakamoto, Hosono and Takahashi became Yellow Magic Orchestra. Sakamoto couldn't have known it yet, but the band he had initially been reluctant to join was about to give his ideas about composition, electronics and technology a platform far larger than anything he had experienced before. And although Yellow Magic Orchestra had three very different musical personalities, Sakamoto would soon acquire a nickname that said quite a lot about what he brought to the group, the Professor. The nickname wasn't entirely a joke. That formal training gave Sakamoto something unusual within the rapidly developing world of electronic pop, a deep understanding of harmony, counterpoint and classical composition. Sakamoto later described his role within the band rather simply, "I arranged the tracks." But his fascination with electronics hadn't begun with the group. While Yellow Magic Orchestra's first album was taking shape in 1978, Sakamoto was also developing his own music on Thousand Knives of Ryuichi Sakamoto. Working with electronic programmer Hideki Matsutake, he explored instruments such as the Roland MC8 microcomposer, an early digital sequencer where musical information had to be entered as numbers, and Sakamoto discovered that even those numbers could have a feel. The MC8 divided a quarter note into 48 steps, but rather than always accepting mathematically perfect divisions, he would sometimes alter the values to create swing. In other words, he was using mathematics to make the machine sound slightly less mathematical. That mixture of musical theory and technology can be heard in Sakamoto's own Yellow Magic Orchestra compositions. On their 1978 debut came Tongpu, or Eastern Wind. Sakamoto later recalled imagining the piece through the unlikely combination of the Beijing Symphony Orchestra and Kraftwerk. A year later came Technopolis, another Sakamoto composition, this time turning the electronic pulse towards the modern city around him. And soon Yellow Magic Orchestra themselves were travelling. Their growing international success took Sakamoto far beyond the Tokyo studios where this music had begun. But taking computer music onto a stage in 1979 wasn't exactly straightforward. The MC8 couldn't retain its information when switched off, so Yellow Magic Orchestra travelled with two of them in operation. While one played the current piece, a programmer prepared the next on the other. Sakamoto later remembered that they even carried a huge Moog modular system, although part of it was there largely because the flashing sequencer lights looked good. Electronic music, it seems, already understood the importance of stage presentation. Yet, at precisely the moment Yellow Magic Orchestra were becoming successful, Sakamoto was already making it clear that the group represented only one part of his musical identity. Interviewed in Britain in 1980, he admitted that less than half of his musical ideas went into Yellow Magic Orchestra, adding that he wanted to show there was much more to him than the group, and he was already doing exactly that. Because while Yellow Magic Orchestra were carrying Sakamoto around the world, his solo music was beginning to take him somewhere considerably stranger. Those other ideas were already looking for somewhere to go. By 1980, Sakamoto's second solo album, B2 Unit, was taking shape, and this time his curiosity was pulling him beyond both Yellow Magic Orchestra and Japan. The recording took him through studios in Tokyo and Europe, but one encounter in London would produce something particularly extraordinary: Riot in Lagos. For the track, Sakamoto sought out British reggae musician, producer and engineer Dennis Bovell, whose experience with dub offered something very different from the tightly controlled electronic world Sakamoto had come from. Bovell was already a fan of Yellow Magic Orchestra, but even he wasn't quite prepared for what was about to arrive. Before Sakamoto appeared at his South London studio, a large truck pulled up outside. Bovell was asked to sign for it, opened it up and found keyboards and electronic equipment sent ahead for the session. His reaction was wonderfully simple. Shit, it's serious. And in 1980 it was. Taking your electronic studio across countries meant moving actual machines, not files on a laptop. Among the equipment Bovell remembers was a new sequential Prophet 10, an instrument he had never encountered before. Sakamoto then set about constructing Riot in Lagos, building drums, percussion, bass and melodic lines electronically, while Bovell recorded and manipulated the results through the techniques of dub. What impressed Bovell wasn't simply the technology, it was the speed of Sakamoto's musical thinking. He remembered Sakamoto listening to what had been recorded, writing what he heard onto manuscript paper, and immediately turning those ideas into the next layer of the composition. The track was assembled in only a matter of hours. The result sounded unlike Yellow Magic Orchestra, and that was precisely the point. Riot in Lagos brought Sakamoto's electronic precision into contact with dub and African rhythmic ideas, creating a piece whose mechanical pulse and fractured rhythms would later sound remarkably prescient. But Sakamoto wasn't trying to invent a genre. He was following his curiosity, taking techniques from different musical worlds and seeing what happened when they collided. And London was about to provide another collision. Because while Sakamoto was working on B2 Unit, a British band whose music he had begun to notice was moving increasingly close to his own orbit. Rather appropriately, they were called Japan. Sakamoto had first encountered Japan during the band's visit to Tokyo in 1980, when he interviewed David Sylvian for the Japanese magazine Music Life. It might have begun as an interview, but the two musicians connected almost immediately. Sakamoto later remembered that within 5 minutes they felt like old friends. Only months later, that new friendship found its way into the studio. Japan were recording Gentlemen Take Polaroids at George Martin's Air Studios in London, while Sakamoto was working on B2 Unit elsewhere in the same building. On August 14th, Sakamoto joined them in Studio 1. He arrived with a Prophet 5 and began constructing what would become Taking Islands in Africa. The performance clearly left an impression. Mick Kahn later remembered Sakamoto seemingly able to read music, smoke, doodle, and operate the synthesizer almost simultaneously. Steve Jansen's recollection was simpler. Sakamoto constructed so much of the track on the Prophet that it was almost like having the day off. There was also a fascinating connection in their choice of instruments. Sakamoto and Japan had independently been drawn to the Prophet 5, with David Sylvian becoming particularly closely associated with it. Richard Barbieri later remembered being amazed by Sakamoto's programming of the instrument during these sessions. On tin drum, Sylvian would make the Prophet 5 one of the key ingredients in Japan's increasingly distinctive electronic sound. Sylvian took Sakamoto's track home that evening and returned the following morning with a melody and lyrics. By the time Sakamoto returned to the studio, Taking Islands in Africa was essentially complete. But this wasn't going to remain simply a guest appearance on a Japan album. In 1982, while Sakamoto was still a member of Yellow Magic Orchestra and Sylvian was still part of Japan, the two came together again for the double A-side Bamboo Houses and Bamboo Music. This time their names appeared together on the record, with Sakamoto contributing keyboards, programming and marimba, and Steve Jansen again joining them on percussion. What had begun with a magazine interview was developing into one of the longest creative relationships of Sakamoto's career. But just as his musical world was becoming increasingly international, another opportunity arrived from much closer to home, and this one wasn't initially about music at all. That opportunity came from one of Japan's most celebrated and controversial film directors, Nagisa Oshima. In 1982, Oshima approached Sakamoto about appearing in his next film, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, a wartime drama set in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. There was only one rather obvious problem. Ryuichi Sakamoto wasn't an actor. That didn't seem to discourage him. Sakamoto later remembered that he was prepared to accept, but before giving Oshima his answer, he suddenly made a request of his own: "Let me write the music." Oshima agreed. Only then did Sakamoto say yes to the acting role. Looking back years later, Sakamoto laughed. "I don't know why I said that, but it worked." So Sakamoto now had two jobs on the same film, neither of which he had done before. His role was Captain Yonoi, commander of the prison camp, opposite David Bowie as British officer Jack Shellier's. For around a month, the two were together every day on the remote South Pacific location. Sakamoto remembered Bowie as friendly and straightforward, and with little to do in the evenings, the two regularly spent time together. Curiously, they didn't discuss the soundtrack at all. Sakamoto hadn't written it yet, and both men were concentrating on acting. Only afterwards did the second challenge begin. Sakamoto had never scored a film and admitted that he simply didn't know how to start. So he asked producer Jeremy Thomas to give him one great film score he could study as a reference. Thomas suggested Citizen Kane and Bernard Herrmann's celebrated music. Sakamoto watched it, respected what Herrmann had done, and concluded that it wasn't going to provide his answer. He would have to invent his own way of doing it. Fortunately, Oshima gave his inexperienced composer an extraordinary amount of freedom. Sakamoto made a list of the scenes where he believed music should appear. Oshima had independently made his own list. According to Sakamoto, the two were 99% identical. Oshima was delighted and essentially left him alone for 3 months, visiting the studio just once. And Sakamoto felt he needed all the help he could get, because when he finally watched the rough cut, he was appalled by one particular performance, his own. He thought his acting looked terrible. His solution, as he later recalled with characteristic self-deprecation, was to put beautiful music over his bad acting. He admitted he was only half joking, but finding that music wasn't straightforward. Sakamoto deliberately avoided simply writing something recognizably Japanese. He wanted music that might suggest the East to listeners in both East and West, without actually belonging to one particular culture. He later described the idea beautifully: somewhere, but nowhere. And from that search came the haunting main theme of Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. For someone who had entered the project with no experience of film scoring, Sakamoto had discovered something rather important. Cinema gave him another place where electronics, melody, orchestration, and his refusal to recognize musical borders could coexist. His first film score had begun almost as an audacious request to a director. It was about to become one of the defining compositions of his life, and Sakamoto wasn't quite finished with it yet. Sakamoto had another idea for his new theme. He wanted to turn it into a song, and his first choice of singer was perhaps the obvious one, David Bowie. But Bowie declined. He had deliberately approached Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence purely as an actor and wanted to keep it that way. Sakamoto understood and instead turned to someone with whom he had already developed a close musical relationship, David Sylvian. Sakamoto later made clear that the idea for a vocal version was entirely his own, rather than something requested by the filmmakers. But Sylvian didn't simply sing Sakamoto's famous melody. Instead, he created a new vocal counter-melody that moved around it, allowing Sakamoto's original theme to remain almost as a second voice beneath him. It transformed the composition without taking away the musical identity Sakamoto had already created. Released in 1983 as Forbidden Colours, the result reached number 16 on the UK singles chart. A melody Sakamoto had written for his first film score had now escaped the cinema altogether and found a second life as a hit record, and in many ways it provides the perfect place to leave the first part of his story. In just 5 years, Sakamoto had gone from reluctantly joining Yellow Magic Orchestra to electronic experimentation, international collaborations, and almost by accident, film composition. But he was still only beginning to discover just how far music could take him.